Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about mercy and justice. To start off, I want to talk about an ancient heresy that occasionally uh, comes up again. It's the heresy of believing that the Old Testament God is a vengeful God, while the New Testament God is a forgiving God. And this is actually very wrong. In both the New and the Old Testaments, you see both mercy and justice both very prominent in both. Um, also, Thomas Aquinas argued that every act of God, every single act of God, is both an act of mercy and an act of justice. But let me give you some examples. We'll start with the Old Testament. At the time of Moses, where we know there was a lot of God's wrath at that time, we have this quote here. So the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in love and fidelity. So, besides that, I went and did a word count on the word mercy and merciful in the book of Psalms, and I found 137 just in the book of Psalms. And I also looked for the phrase, His mercy endures forever, or something along those lines in Psalms, and that's found 35 times in the book of Psalms. Most of those are in chapters 118 and 136. And then let's go to the New Testament. Um, if you read Jesus, if you look carefully, you'll probably discover that Jesus talks about wrath a lot more than you probably remember. Here's just one line example. Uh, Jesus said, I tell you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom on that day than for that town. All right, so Sodom is one of the two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, that were destroyed by God way back in the book of Genesis for their sin. And Jesus is talking about these towns, what they'll face if they reject the word that he sent his disciples to them to preach. Um, so besides that, if you're not convinced that there's wrath in the New Testament, try reading the book of Revelation. You'll be convinced then if you weren't before. Um, and so the question might come up, well, why does it seem like the Old Testament is wrathful while the New is forgiving? And that's probably because we need to know God's wrath first before we can understand God's mercy. If we were to receive God's mercy first, it would look to us like permissiveness, like God doesn't care that we sin. But if we know God's wrath first, then we can know that we can understand God's mercy when we see it. So that's why it was important for us to know God's wrath first. Um, if you notice the central act of Jesus in all the Gospels, what was it? It was his death on the cross. And that act was principally an act of mercy. In other words, God's mission um, at his first coming was a mission of mercy. However, we know that when he returns, he will act in justice. Um, and we um, know this for a number of reasons, but I want to show one little passage to you from the book of Deuteronomy. This was a law that God gave about what they must obey when they're to conquer a city. Um, and it goes, when you draw near a city to attack it, offer it terms of peace. Right? So if we take this and look at what Jesus did, his first coming, he's offering us terms of peace, right? And we need to decide if we are to accept it. But then as the second coming comes the actual act of conquering. Those who agreed to God's terms will be saved, and those who disagree, um, you know, there will be consequences. Let's, however, look at the mercy side of this. There's a quote from Jesus. It's one of the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." So we see here that if we want to receive mercy, it requires that we ourselves are merciful. And so for this reason, we have to practice mercy in order to receive it. And one of the areas that we need to remember to practice mercy is in the making of laws. So the idea in making a law is the idea should never be to ruin the person, right? Because if the idea is to ruin the person, then that's justice devoid of mercy. So we should always seek the redemption of others, not the ruin of others when we impose justice. Another area I need to point out is in the case of raising children. When we threaten punishment for doing wrong with our young children, we should always follow through with that. That's necessary because we need to teach discipline. Of course, we should never punish something too severe. But when the children grow older and have learned discipline, then we can show additional mercy when they repent, right? And this follows what I said before about how God had to show us wrath first before he could show us mercy. Another side of this I want to point out is what Jesus said about turning the other cheek. Here's a quote from Jesus. These are two quotes from two different Gospels. The first one goes, "But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him as well." And this is from Luke. "To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold your tunic." All right, so we see this twice in the Gospels, so this is a very clear commandment from Jesus. But the key to this, you have to understand, the key to this is love. When you turn the other cheek, it has to be out of love. I've seen people try to follow this and turn the other cheek, and it's not out of love, and it doesn't end well. It's sometimes like they're trying to turn the other cheek as in trying to have the higher moral ground or something like that. And that's not what Jesus said. He said to turn the other cheek, and it's implied that it should be with love for that person. And it turns out that when you do it out of love, the response is much better. The final point I want to go over is the importance that we don't judge. So justice and mercy is important, but we need to remember that judging belongs to God, and whom God gives authority to judge. For example, a court judge is somebody that God has given authority to judge, but that authority is limited to that particular judge's station. For example, he can't pass sentence on somebody that he passes on the street, but he can pass judgment in the courtroom. In the same vein, parents have authority to judge if their underage children should be punished. And that's authority to judge given to them by God, but that authority also has, limitations. But we have to remember that we don't have authority to judge someone such that we would get even with them as if we were their judge, right? If they wronged us, we don't have the ability or the authority to judge that person and get even with that person, because we judge that they're guilty, right? So this goes back to the rule that we must always turn the other cheek and leave the judging to God. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about something related to mercy and justice, which is forgiveness. May God bless you.